I never thought retirement would involve this much drama. I used to imagine my golden years as quiet mornings with coffee, long walks with my dog Cooper, and maybe a few trips to the golf course. After 35 years working in tech around Washington, D.C., I was ready for peace. But peace isn't what you get when your neighborhood HOA is run by a woman named Karen. And not just any Karen, this one had a clipboard, a shrill voice, and the kind of self-righteous power trip that could ruin a community. You won't believe this, but the fight started over Cooper. He's a friendly golden retriever, the kind of dog that wags at strangers and melts hearts. To me, he's family, but to Karen, he was a direct violation of community policy. That's what she wrote on the notice she taped to my front. Doctor in bold red ink. I stood there holding the letter, shaking my head. Pet ban enforcement begins immediately, it said. The HOA had slipped in a rule about restricting pets over 30 pounds, supposedly for safety reasons. The kicker. Karen's own poodle strutted through the neighborhood like royalty. I remember muttering to myself, so Cooper is dangerous, but her yapping furball isn't? That was the first seed of anger, and if you've ever dealt with HOA revenge stories, you know how they always start with something small. One unfair rule, one push too far. The next HOA meeting was packed. Karen sat at the head of the table like she was queen of the suburbs, glasses perched low, tapping her pen against the agenda. "We must keep the neighborhood safe," she declared, her voice carrying through the hall. "Large animals pose risks." I raised my hand. "Cooper isn't a risk. He's a 10-year-old retriever who mostly naps and chases tennis balls. This feels like selective enforcement." Karen's smile was sharp. "Rules apply to everyone, Mr. Thompson. If you don't like it, perhaps this isn't the right community for you." That stung. After years of paying dues, mowing my lawn and being a good neighbor, I was being told to pack up. A few people shifted in their seats. Some neighbors avoided my eyes, others gave small nods of sympathy. But no one spoke up. Not. Yet the next week, another notice arrived. This time, daily fines will be imposed until the violation is resolved. The violation, of course, was Cooper simply existing. I paused, gripping the paper so tightly it crumpled. Pause if you're raging right now. I'd tell you if this were a video, because I was. My dog wasn't going anywhere. Karen had pushed me into a corner, and when people like me get cornered, we don't lash out, we get clever. Now, here's the twist you won't see coming. Karen wasn't as untouchable as she thought. The HOA board looked solid on the surface, but cracks were showing. Members whispered about missing funds, mysterious maintenance fees, and odd contracts awarded to companies connected to Karen's brother-in-law. I didn't know it yet, but my fight over Cooper was about to expose something much bigger. One evening, I walked Cooper past the community pool and spotted my neighbor, Janet, sitting on a bench, arms crossed. "Rough week?" I asked. She sighed. "Karen fined me for leaving my recycling bin out an extra day, $30. And then she doubled it when I forgot again. I've lived here 20 years. Never had a problem until she took over." That was frustration spot number one. Relatable HOA pain. Everyone had their own Karen story. A couple down the street had been cited for hanging a wind chime. Another man got fined for planting tomatoes in his backyard garden. Petty stuff, but it added up. I started keeping notes. Every complaint, every absurd fine, every whispered rumor. I didn't know exactly where it would lead, but I felt it building, like stacking dry wood before striking a match. The real game changer came during a board meeting a month later. Karen strutted in late, waving papers. "We're increasing HOA dues," she announced without preamble. "It's necessary for community improvements." "What improvements?" I asked. She gave that smug smile again. "Security upgrades, landscaping, things you wouldn't understand." But Janet spoke up this time. "Funny, because last year's Landscaping budget was triple what it should have been, and all we got were 2 dead azaleas by the front gate. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Neighbors were catching on. This was the first crack in Karen's armor. I went home that night and started digging. And here's where my tech background came in handy. Old financial statements were posted online in the HOA portal. Buried in the spreadsheets were payments to a company called Metro Services LLC. A quick search revealed it was run by none other than Karen's brother-in-law. Inflated charges for lawn care, pool cleaning, even Christmas lights. My heart raced. This wasn't just petty fines, this was corruption, and I had proof. But here's the catch. Going public too early would backfire. Karen was ruthless, and if she caught wind of my digging, she'd double down. I needed a plan, something airtight, something that would make her own allies turn against her. One night, sitting on my porch with Cooper's head in my lap, I whispered, "We're not just fighting for us anymore, buddy. We're fighting for the whole neighborhood. Now let me throw this to you. What would you do if you found your HOA president funneling money to her family? Would you go straight to the police or build your case quietly? Because that's where I was standing at the edge of something big. The revenge wasn't about a dog anymore. It was about exposing Karen for what she really was. But here's the part you'll want to stick around for. When the board finally turned on her, it wasn't because of me. It was because of something Karen herself did, something so outrageous. It blew up in her face and made every neighbor furious. Predict what you think it was in the comments, because the twist is coming. And trust me, when you hear how it all unraveled, you'll see why this is one of those suburban justice tales that people share for years. For now, just remember, the HOA might think they have all the power, but sometimes the underdog, literally, in this case, wins the fight. By now, Cooper's violation had become a running joke among my neighbors. Every morning when I walked him down Oakview Lane, folks would wave and whisper, "Watch out, here comes the outlaw golden retriever." Some even laughed about it, but behind the humor, there was tension, because they all knew, if Karen could bully me over my dog, she could bully anyone. One crisp October morning, I found another notice taped to my door. Final warning. Remove the animal or face lien proceedings. A lien. Over my dog. I felt the anger crawl up my chest like fire. A lien on my house for this nonsense, I muttered. Cooper wagged his tail, oblivious to the war raging around him. That was the HOA's playbook. Threaten, intimidate, hope you back down. But I wasn't backing down, and I wasn't alone anymore. That evening, Janet knocked on my door, clutching a folder. "You'll want to see this," she said. Inside were copies of her own fines, including one that read, "Violation, seasonal decor displayed before authorized date." Her crime, hanging a pumpkin wreath on October 1st. She pointed at the fine print. She charged me $50, $50, for a wreath. I shook my head. "You've got to be kidding." Not kidding. And she doubled it when I didn't take it down. Janet's voice cracked, and I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She was a retired schoolteacher, not someone who wanted to spend her golden years sparring with a power-hungry neighbor. Right there, I decided I wasn't just fighting for myself. This was about the whole community. I started asking around. Tom, the Vietnam vet 2 houses down, had been fined for having a flagpole that was too tall. Maria, a young mom, was threatened for letting her kids draw with chalk on the sidewalk. Even Mr. Patel, who barely said more than a polite hello, showed me a stack of warnings about the color of his garage door being non-compliant beige. Every story was the same. Petty fines, selective enforcement, and Karen's smug smile when you dared to protest. But then came the first twist. At the next board meeting, Karen made her boldest move yet. She announced a new rule banning not just big dogs, but all pets without special board approval. Cats, birds, even goldfish. The room erupted. People gasped, muttered, some shouted outright. "You can't ban goldfish," a man in the back yelled. Karen banged her gavel. "Order! This is about protecting property values. If you people truly cared about your homes, you'd support this." I stood, my voice steady. "This isn't about property values. This is about control, and we're not blind to what's really going on." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful, Mr. Thompson." That was my first real shot across the bow. And judging by the murmurs that followed, the neighbors were ready to rally. Later that night, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of an invoice. It showed $12,000 billed to the HOA for pool maintenance, signed by Metro Services LLC, the same shady company I'd already flagged. No return address, no note, just evidence. Someone inside the board wanted me to see this. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, adrenaline pumping. Who sent it? A whistleblower? A fed-up board member? Whoever it was, they had just handed me a weapon. The next day, I called Janet. "We're going to need a bigger folder," I said. Together, we began building a case, collecting fines, invoices, emails, anything we could get our hands on. My old tech skills came alive. I cross-referenced spreadsheets, highlighted irregularities, traced payment trails. Each line told a story of Karen's greed. But here's where it got dicey. Karen must have suspected something, because suddenly I noticed a white SUV idling by my house more often. Neighbors said Karen had been asking about me, about whether I was stirring up trouble. The air felt heavier, like storm clouds gathering, and then the second twist hit. Karen showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, smile tighter than a vice. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson. I wanted to personally deliver this notice." She handed me a letter and lingered, eyes scanning my living room like she owned the place. "What now?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Unapproved modifications. Your mailbox doesn't meet the current design standard." I laughed. "My mailbox? It's been the same for 15 years. "Standards change," she said sweetly. "You'll need to replace it within 7 days. Or, well, you know the procedure." I stared at her, my jaw clenched. She was trying to rattle me, to show she had the upper hand. But what she didn't realize was that every petty move she made was pushing more neighbors onto my side. After she left, I snapped a picture of the notice and texted it to Janet. "Mailbox is now a threat." "This woman's out of control," Janet replied instantly. "We need to act. Let's call a community meeting without her." And that's exactly what we did. We gathered in Tom's garage one chilly evening. Folding chairs, coffee urn, neighbors. Bundled in coats, nearly 30 people showed up, more than half the community. Everyone had a story, everyone had a grievance, and for the first time they weren't whispering. They were angry. Tom slammed his fist on the table. "I fought in a war for freedom, and I'll be damned if I'm letting some HOA Karen tell me how tall my flag can fly." Applause erupted. The energy was electric. I stood and laid out what I'd found so far, the shady invoices, the inflated fees, the pattern of abuse. Gasps, groans, muttered curses filled the garage. People were fed up. Maria leaned forward, eyes wide. "So what do we do?" I took a breath. "We don't just complain. We build a case. We push for an audit. And if they resist, we take it to the county." A buzz of excitement ran through the crowd. For the first time, I saw hope in their faces. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. The very next day, every household that attended our secret meeting received a warning letter. Same wording, same threats. Someone had tipped her off. That's when I realized the board wasn't united. Some were scared of her, others complicit. But one of them was helping us. The anonymous invoice proved it. And here's the kicker. Karen's downfall wouldn't come from us shouting the loudest. It would come from the people closest to her, finally deciding they'd had enough. Now let me pause here and ask you, If you discovered your HOA president was secretly enriching her family while bullying neighbors with fake rules, would you fight back quietly or go nuclear right away? Drop your answer in the comments, because in the next chapter, the fireworks really begin. Karen makes her biggest mistake yet, one so outrageous it doesn't just push the board against her, it lights the whole neighborhood on fire. Smash that like button if you've ever dealt with an unfair HOA. And don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss the showdown that's coming. If you thought Karen's power trip had peaked with mailbox fines and goldfish bans, you're in for a surprise. Because what came next was so outrageous, so unbelievably tone-deaf, that it lit the fuse on her own downfall. It started with a letter that landed in every mailbox on Oakview Lane, stamped with the HOA seal, bold font at the top, mandatory pet removal deadline. The board, meaning Karen, was demanding that all residents with pets remove them from the property within 30 days or face escalating fines, liens, and possible legal action. Yes, you heard that right. She actually tried to ban all. Pets, dogs, cats, parakeets, hamsters. I half expected to see stuffed teddy bears listed just for good measure. I read the letter 3 times, each word angrier than the last. "She's lost her mind," I muttered to Cooper, who thumped his tail like he agreed. The neighborhood erupted. People stormed into the streets, waving their notices. Kids cried, clutching their cats. Seniors fumed about being forced to give up their companions. For many of us, pets weren't just animals, they were family. Janet showed up at my door, cheeks flushed red. "She's crossed the line. This isn't about rules anymore. This is cruelty." And she was right. That was frustration spot number 2. Karen had turned neighborly annoyance into outright fury. The following HOA meeting was standing room only. Folks crowded into the community center, faces tight with anger. Karen strutted in last, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Clutching that infamous clipboard like it was a royal scepter, she tapped her gavel. "Order! This meeting will come to order." "Order?" Tom shouted from the back. "You want us to get rid of our pets? Have you lost your mind?" Karen smirked. "The board voted unanimously. It's for property values and sanitation." That was her first mistake. Because the crowd turned their eyes to the board members sitting beside her, 5 men and women, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Their silence was deafening. I stood, holding my notice in the air. "Unanimous? Did you all really vote for this?" Murmurs spread. The board members avoided my gaze, but one, Lisa, a younger woman who joined the board last year, looked pale. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but Karen shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. That's when I saw it. The board wasn't united. Karen was forcing her will, and cracks were widening. "Pets are not a threat to property values," I said loudly. "But do you know what is? Lawsuits, bad press, angry homeowners." Gasps. Karen banged her gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Thompson, or you will be removed." But the crowd was already buzzing, restless, angry. And then came the third twist. Lisa finally stood. Her voice shook, but she spoke clearly. "I didn't vote for this. None of us did. Karen pushed it through without discussion." The room exploded. People shouted, clapped, demanded answers. Karen's face turned crimson. "Quiet," she screeched. "Quiet, or I'll clear the room." But it was too late. The spell had broken. For the first time, her control slipped in public view. That night, my phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. "Did you hear Lisa? She's on our side." Time to push harder. Audit, audit, audit. And just like that, we had our first ally on the inside. The very next day, another envelope appeared in my mailbox, this one thicker, heavier. Inside were more invoices, tens of thousands of dollars paid to Metro Services LLC for things that clearly hadn't been done. Pest control for $8,000 when we hadn't seen an exterminator in months. Landscaping charges during the dead of winter. It was a gold mine of evidence. But with each step forward, Karen grew more desperate. She started patrolling the neighborhood like a sheriff in an old western, snapping photos of porches, trash bins, even kids' bicycles left on sidewalks. One evening, I caught her crouching near my yard, photographing Cooper's water bowl. I opened the door. "Need something, Karen?" She jumped, straightened, and sneered. "Documenting violations. You'll be hearing from the board." I laughed. "Oh, I bet I will." What she didn't know was that every move she made was strengthening our case. Neighbors were now forwarding me copies of their fines, their letters, even screenshots of Karen's condescending emails. We were building a mountain she couldn't climb. But here's where the stakes shot up. At the next HOA meeting, Karen tried to silence me. Literally, she announced a new decorum rule, banning residents from speaking unless recognized by the chair. And of course she was the chair. "Only constructive comments will be heard," she declared, looking directly at me. I raised my hand. "What qualifies as constructive?" She smiled thinly. "Anything that doesn't involve wild accusations or conspiracy theories." The crowd booed. People shouted over her, demanding fairness. But she shut the meeting down early, gavel slamming, storming out like a villain in a courtroom drama. That was the HOA pushback phase. Karen was panicking, doubling down, trying to lock the doors just as people were waking up. But here's the poetic part. Her arrogance was about to backfire in a way she never saw coming, because 2 weeks later, the county auditor's office announced a random compliance review of our HOA's finances. Random. Yeah, right. I had a pretty good idea whose hands had delivered those invoices to the right people. The neighborhood buzzed like electricity. Karen was livid. She stormed from house to house, warning residents not to slander the board. But the whispers grew louder, and her once loyal allies began to vanish. Even the board members kept their distance, showing up late to meetings, avoiding eye contact. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lisa stopped by my porch. She glanced around nervously before speaking. "You're not wrong about the finances. We've suspected it for a while, but Karen, she intimidates people. She threatens to ruin them." I leaned forward. "Lisa, if you step up, people will follow. She's not as powerful as she looks." Her eyes searched mine, and for the first time I saw resolve. If the audit finds what I think it will, she's finished. That night, I sat in my living room, Cooper curled at my feet, and felt something shift. For months, I'd been reacting, defending, scrambling. But now, the tide was turning. The evidence was out there. The board was cracking. The neighbors were rising. The underdog was about to take the lead. Now let me ask you, if you were Lisa sitting on that board, would you risk speaking out against someone like Karen? Or would you stay silent to protect yourself? It's not an easy choice, and I'd love to hear what you do in the comments. And before I wrap this story, hit that like button if you've ever seen arrogance finally catch up with someone, because that's where we're headed. The fall is coming, and trust me, it's going to be one of the sweetest HOA lawsuit successes you've ever heard. When word of the county audit spread, the neighborhood felt different. For months, Karen had stalked our cul-de-sacs like an untouchable queen. But suddenly the queen's crown was slipping. People walked their dogs with a little more confidence, kids chalked rainbows on sidewalks again, and neighbors who used to whisper began speaking out loud. But don't get me wrong, Karen wasn't going quietly. If anything, she doubled down. She launched what I called Operation Intimidation. It started with daily warning letters. Tom got another fine for his non-regulation flagpole. Maria was cited because her kids' bikes were left in the driveway after dusk. Janet was fined again, this time for overwatering her lawn. And me? I was slapped with 3 violations in a single week: mailbox, dog, and supposedly unsightly recycling bins. Every time I opened an envelope with Karen's smug signature at the bottom, I felt my blood pressure rise. But here's the thing. She was overplaying her hand. Each ridiculous fine just made the neighbors angrier and angrier. One evening, I sat with Janet at her kitchen table. Her stack of fines sat in a neat pile between us. "She's trying to drown us in paperwork," she said, voice trembling with exhaustion. "She's trying to break us," I replied. "But you don't break when you've got the truth on your side." I tapped the manila folder I'd brought with me, the invoices, the emails, the evidence. The weight of it felt heavier every day, not just because of the paper, but because of what it meant. The audit team was scheduled to arrive the following week. You could feel the anticipation buzzing in the air. It was like waiting for a thunderstorm. You knew it was coming, you just didn't know how hard it would hit. And then came twist 4. 2 days before the audit, Karen called an emergency board meeting. Word spread fast, and by the time I got to the community center, the place was packed. She stood at the front, red-faced but smiling, like she had an ace up her sleeve. "The county has announced a review," she began, "but I assure you, this board has nothing to hide. We welcome their oversight." Her words dripped with false confidence. The neighbors shifted, unconvinced. Then she dropped her so-called bombshell. "In the meantime, we are enacting a special assessment. Every household must pay an additional $500 this month to cover legal fees associated with the audit." The room exploded. People shouted, cursed, threw their hands in the air. "You can't charge us for your mistakes," one man yelled. "This is theft," shouted another. Karen banged her gavel, face twisted. "Order! Order!" But no one was listening. Even the board members looked stunned. Lisa's jaw hung open. Another member buried his face in his hands. I stood, my voice cutting through the chaos. "You want us to pay to defend you against your own corruption? That's not how this works. That's how guilty people act." The room roared with agreement. Phones came out. People were recording. And Karen, for the first time, looked nervous. That night, clips of the meeting flooded neighborhood group chats. "Karen loses it at HOA meeting. Special assessment scam." Folks were furious. For once, the embarrassment wasn't on us. It was on her. The next morning, Lisa knocked on my door. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "I can't do this anymore," she said quietly. "She's been manipulating the board, bullying us into silence, but last night, I realized she's finished." I invited her in, poured coffee, and listened as she explained. Karen had been bypassing board votes, falsifying meeting minutes, even forging signatures to push through policies. Lisa had proof, emails, and internal memos. When she slid a flash drive across my table, my hands shook. "You understand what this means, right?" I asked. Lisa nodded. "It means when the auditors come, they won't just find sloppy accounting, they'll find fraud." That was the turning point. The audit team arrived that Friday, 2 stern-looking men in suits carrying clipboards. Karen tried to play hostess, plastering on a fake smile, but her charm cracked under their questions. I was there, along with dozens of neighbors, watching as the auditors flipped through invoices, cross-checked numbers, and frowned at discrepancies. Karen's voice grew shrill as the hours dragged on. "This is all standard practice. Nothing unusual here," but the auditors weren't buying it. One of them held up an invoice. $6,000 for pool heating. In July, the room burst into laughter. Karen's face turned crimson. It was a humiliation she couldn't spin. That evening, neighbors gathered in driveways, buzzing with excitement. "Did you see her face?" Janet laughed. "She looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole." Tom slapped me on the back. "You started this, son. You gave us the backbone to fight." I smiled, but inside I knew it wasn't over. The audit was just the beginning. The real showdown was coming, and Karen would fight tooth and nail to keep her grip on power. But here's where you come in, listener. What would you do if you were in my shoes, holding a flash drive full of proof that could bury the HOA president once and for all? Would you hand it straight to the auditors or wait for the perfect moment to drop the hammer? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you'd play it. And if this story has you cheering every time Karen trips over her own arrogance, smash that like button. Because in the next chapter, the gloves come off. The board starts turning on her, the community unites, and the revenge you've been waiting for finally takes shape. If the audit was the crack in the dam, what happened next was the flood. Karen had always carried herself like she was untouchable, even when neighbors booed her at meetings, even when fines piled high and people whispered about her behind her back. She stood tall with that smug smile. But after the auditors poked holes in her books, that smile began to twitch, and when a bully feels her grip slipping, she doesn't back down. She lashes out. The very next week, a new wave of violation letters hit every doorstep. It was absurd. Maria's kids got fined for excessive chalk usage. Tom's flag was now in violation of updated wind-resistance standards. Janet was dinged for lawn height discrepancies, even though her grass looked like it belonged in a magazine. And me, I got a notice saying my porch light bulb was the wrong wattage. I laughed out loud when I read it, but deep down, I knew what this was. Karen's scorched earth strategy. If she couldn't scare us into silence, she'd bury us in paper. The neighbors weren't having it. That Friday evening, we gathered in Tom's garage again. More people showed up than ever before, almost the entire community. Folding chairs filled every corner, and folks stood shoulder to shoulder, anger buzzing in the air. "She's out of control," Maria said, waving her fine in the air. "She thinks she owns us." "She's scared," I said. "The audit rattled her, that's why she's pushing harder." "But here's the thing. We've got her where we want her. We have proof, we have numbers. And now, thanks to Lisa, we have inside information." Everyone turned toward Lisa, who sat quietly in the corner. She took a deep breath. "It's true. Karen's been forging votes, pushing through rules without approval. I've seen the emails, and the auditors have too. They know something's rotten." A ripple of murmurs spread through the garage. Hope. For the first time, people weren't just angry, they were ready to act. That's when Tom stood, chest out, voice booming. "Then it's time we stop being scared. We need to vote her out." The room erupted in cheers. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. Karen's reign wasn't just cracking, it was crumbling. But here's where the story takes a twist. The very next day, as if she'd sensed our plans, Karen called a mandatory compliance inspection. She marched around the neighborhood with 2 board members in tow, snapping photos, scribbling notes, barking orders like a drill sergeant. When she reached my house, I was sitting on the porch with Cooper. "Evening, Karen," I said casually. She sneered. "Mr. Thompson, this porch light is still non-compliant. It's a 60-watt bulb, same as everyone else's. Incorrect. It's an off-brand bulb. We require standard issue." I actually laughed. "Karen, are you hearing yourself? You're writing people up over light bulbs." Her face flushed red. "I'll have you removed from this community if it's the last thing I do." Now that's when the neighbors made their move. One by one, people stepped out of their houses, watching, recording on their phones. Maria called out, "Leave him alone, Karen." Tom shouted, "Pick on someone your own size." Karen froze, realizing she wasn't just bullying one man. She was staring down a neighborhood united, and for the first time, she looked rattled. That evening, I got another envelope. But this one wasn't a fine. It was a petition. Lisa had drafted it, calling for a special election to remove Karen as HOA president. All we needed was signatures from 60% of homeowners. I didn't even have to ask. The next morning, people lined up at my porch to sign. Janet signed with a flourish. Tom practically carved his name into the paper. Even quiet Mr. Patel came by, smiling as he handed me his pen. We hit the threshold. In 2 days flat, but just as the victory seemed within reach, Karen made her boldest and dumbest move yet. She sent out an official letter declaring the petition invalid, claiming it was forged, and illegally circulated. Then in a fit of desperation, she threatened to sue anyone who signed it. That was the final straw. Phones blew up that night. Neighbors were furious. "She can't sue all of us. She's bluffing. We've got to fight back harder." So, we did. Lisa called an emergency meeting of the board without Karen. She explained that the bylaws allowed for a recall election if the community demanded it. And with the petition in hand, the demand was undeniable. For the first time, the board members, those same people who once sat silent while Karen barked orders, stood together against her. The showdown was set. The recall election would be held. In 2 weeks, open to every homeowner. Karen would get her chance to defend herself, but the neighbors would have the final say. Now let me stop here and ask you something. If you had been in our neighborhood, would you have signed that petition, even knowing Karen was threatening lawsuits? Or would you have stayed quiet to avoid the risk? I really want to know, because that decision right there separated the scared from the brave. And before I wrap this up, if you've ever wished you could see a bully finally face the music, smash that like button. Because in the next chapter, we march into the most dramatic HOA meeting this suburb has ever seen, the night Karen's empire finally starts to collapse. The night of the recall election felt like the Super Bowl of our little suburb. You could practically taste the tension in the air. Every porch light was on, every driveway was full, and neighbors, some who hadn't spoken in years, were walking side by side toward the community center. I'll never forget the sight. Tom had his American flag folded under his arm like a shield. Maria marched with her kids in tow, holding their chalk drawings as if they were banners of war. Janet wore her best church dress, head held high, eyes burning with quiet determination. And me? I walked Cooper one last lap around the block before heading in. My dog had been through all of it with me, watching Karen's reign tear this neighborhood apart. Tonight, though, I had a feeling he could sense what was coming. His tail wagged, like he knew freedom was around the corner. Inside the hall, the air was thick with whispers and anticipation. The folding chairs were packed, the walls lined with neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, even the ones who'd never cared about. HOA meetings showed up tonight. At the front sat the board, minus Karen, who was pacing near the podium like a caged lion. Her usually perfect hair was frizzed at the edges, her lips pressed so tight they were nearly white. She looked less like a queen and more like someone about to lose her throne. When the meeting started, Lisa stood first. Her voice was calm, steady, almost soothing. "We are here tonight to vote on the recall petition submitted by the homeowners. This meeting is in compliance with the bylaws. Each resident will have one vote." Karen shot up like a firecracker. "This entire process is a sham," she shouted. "Those petitions were forged. Do you think you can overthrow me with lies?" Her voice cracked on that last word. For the first time, I think everyone saw it. The desperation. Tom never won. To back down stood from the crowd. "Forged? We signed them with our own hands, Karen. You've been bleeding this neighborhood dry, fining people for nonsense, and lining your pockets while you're at it. We are done being afraid of you." A roar of applause filled the room. Even the usually timid neighbors clapped and cheered. Karen's face twisted in rage, but she couldn't drown them out. Then Lisa gave her the floor. "Per the rules, President Karen, you may defend yourself." What followed was one of the wildest rants I've ever heard in my life. She screamed about ungrateful peasants, accused Tom of vandalism, Maria of corruption, even suggested Lisa was secretly trying to destroy the HOA from within. She waved papers in the air. Half of them were old violation notices, the other half were gibberish. By the time she was done, the room wasn't angry anymore. They were embarrassed for her. That's when I stood up. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had to say something. Folks, this isn't just about Karen. This is about all of us. Do we want an HOA that bullies us, that fines kids for chalk, that tells us what light bulbs we can buy? Or do we want a community that looks out for each other? Tonight, we get to decide. Silence fell, heavy and electric. Then slowly people began to nod. The vote began. One by one, names were called. Each homeowner stood, walked to the front, and placed their ballot into a sealed box. Some did it with pride, some with trembling hands, but every single one felt like a hammer striking another nail in Karen's coffin. Karen sat there, fuming, tapping her nails against the table like machine guns. When the last ballot was cast, Lisa and the other board members counted them out loud. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. The 23 votes, recall. 5 votes, keep. A pause. The motion passes. Karen is officially removed as HOA president. The room exploded. Cheers, whistles, even tears. Maria hugged her kids. Tom slapped me on the back so hard I nearly toppled over. Janet clasped her hands and whispered, "Thank God." Karen, she didn't go quietly. She stormed out of the room, shouting, "You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." Doors slammed behind her, but no one chased her. For the first time in years, the neighborhood didn't bend to her threats, and in that moment, something magical happened. The neighbors turned to each other, not as strangers sharing a zip code, but as friends who had fought and won together. People who'd been divided by fear were suddenly united in victory. That night, the community center felt less like a battlefield and more like a family reunion. Someone brought donuts, someone else passed around soda cans, and laughter, real, unrestrained laughter, echoed through the hall. But as sweet as the victory was, we all knew one thing. Karen wasn't finished. People like her never walk away quietly, and I was right. The very next morning, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. Not a fine this time, but a lawsuit. Karen had filed against me personally, accusing me of slander, harassment, and conspiracy. When I opened it, my hands shook. She wasn't just trying to punish me, she was trying to break me, and yet, as heavy as that envelope felt, I couldn't help but smile. Because she didn't understand one thing. She wasn't up against me anymore. She was up against all of us. If you were sitting in that community hall during the recall vote, would you have stood up to speak like I did, or would you have stayed quiet and let others do the talking? Be honest, because courage comes in different forms. If you've ever wished you could stand up to someone like Karen and see justice done, drop a "justice served" in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because in the next chapter, the courtroom becomes our new battlefield. The morning sunlight spilled across my kitchen table as I stared at the lawsuit papers. Each page was crammed with legal jargon, but the bold accusations were easy enough to read. Defendant engaged in slanderous remarks, coordinated harassment, and conspired to remove the plaintiff unlawfully from her elected position. Karen had turned her vendetta into a weapon, and she was pointing it straight at me. I'll be honest, I felt the fear in my bones. I'm not a lawyer, not some corporate heavyweight who could laugh at a legal threat. I'm just a regular guy, with a dog, a mortgage, and a stubborn streak. But here's the thing. Fear can turn into something else if you let it. Determination. That evening, I gathered the neighbors in my backyard. Tom brought a cooler of sodas. Maria carried fresh empanadas, and Janet showed up with a notebook full of minutes she'd kept from every HOA meeting. Even Lisa came, though she looked nervous. I laid the papers on the picnic table. She's suing me, but make no mistake, she's suing all of us. If she wins, she'll come after anyone who dared to stand against her. The group fell silent. Even Cooper, sitting at my feet, seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Then Tom slammed his fist on the table. "We're not letting her bully. You not now, not ever. We'll fight her together." Maria nodded. She fined my kids for chalk drawings. She tried to shame Janet for her plants. Enough is enough. And Janet, bless her, leaned forward with surprising steel in her voice. I kept everything, every notice, every ridiculous fine, every threat she made at meetings. If this goes to court, I'll testify. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel alone. The next morning, I made a call that changed everything. I hired a lawyer. His name was Daniel Price, a sharp but approachable attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. When I handed him the lawsuit, he chuckled softly. "She's overplayed her hand," he said. "Defamation, harassment. None of this will stand. But the best part, we can counter-sue. Fraudulent fines, misuse of HOA funds, intimidation. You've got a stronger case than she does." I could have hugged him right there in his office. The weeks leading up to the court date felt like gearing up for battle. Daniel worked tirelessly, digging into financial records, interviewing neighbors, and gathering every shred of evidence. We had. Janet's notebooks turned out to be gold. Lisa found emails Karen had sent that dripped with threats and manipulation. And Maria brought pictures of her kids' chalk drawings, the ones Karen had called graffiti. Each piece was like a puzzle snapping into place. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She strutted around the neighborhood like nothing had changed, sneering at me when we crossed paths. "Enjoy it while you can," she hissed one afternoon as I watered my lawn. "When I'm through, you'll wish you never moved here." But the more she threatened, the more the neighbors rallied. People who'd once avoided me were dropping off casseroles, offering to testify, even slipping envelopes with a few dollars into my mailbox to help with legal fees. It was humbling, heartwarming. Proof that when people band together, bullies don't stand a chance. Finally, the day arrived. Walking into the courthouse was like stepping into another world. The cold marble floors, the towering columns, the quiet hum of whispered conversations, it all pressed down on me. But when I looked back and saw Tom, Maria, Janet, Lisa, and half the neighborhood sitting in the gallery, I straightened my shoulders. Karen was there too, of course. She wore a crisp navy suit and a smug smile, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he hadn't cracked a smile since the 90s. She gave me a little wave, as if this was some kind of game. The judge entered, and the case began. Karen's lawyer went first, painting me as a troublemaker who had rallied a mob to destroy an upstanding HOA president's reputation. He used words like conspiracy and malicious intent, trying to make me sound like a villain out of a soap opera. Then Daniel stood, calm, measured, almost surgical in his delivery. He presented Janet's notebooks, the photos of Maria's kids' drawings, copies of outrageous fines, and even bank statements that hinted Karen had been funneling HOA funds into her own special projects. At one point, Daniel asked Maria to testify. She stood tall, her voice steady as she described the day Karen screamed at her kids for drawing butterflies on the sidewalk. The courtroom was silent, every eye on the brave mother telling her truth. Then it was Tom's turn. He described the fines for his flag, the threats, the way Karen tried to intimidate him. His words carried weight, the kind of honesty you can't, you fake. And finally, Lisa. She was the wild card. Nervous but resolute, she testified about the internal board emails, the manipulation, the pressure Karen put on everyone. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. By the time Daniel rested our case, the gallery was buzzing. Even the judge looked unimpressed with Karen's defense. But Karen wasn't done. When she took the stand, she turned on the theatrics. Tears, accusations, wild claims that we were all jealous of her leadership. She even pointed at me, shouting, "He's been out to destroy me from the beginning." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have evidence of these claims, Ms. Simmons?" Karen stammered, shuffled papers, then muttered, "It's obvious. Everyone knows it." That was the moment. You could feel it, the shift. Her mask slipped, and the courtroom saw her for what she was, a tyrant clinging to power. When the judge finally spoke, my heart nearly stopped. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds no merit in the plaintiff's claims. The case is dismissed. Furthermore, the court will hear the defendant's counterclaim regarding misuse of HOA funds and harassment. Karen's face turned chalk white. She opened her mouth to protest, but her lawyer tugged her sleeve and shook his head. The gavel came down, sharp and final, and just like that, the tide had turned. As we spilled out of the courthouse, the neighbors cheered. Tom clapped me on the shoulder, Maria hugged me tight, and Janet whispered, "Justice is finally catching up to her." But even in that moment of triumph, I knew this wasn't over. The judge had dismissed her case, but now ours was moving forward. And this time, Karen would be the one scrambling to defend herself. For years, she'd wielded fear like a weapon. But fear only works if people stay silent. And we weren't silent anymore. If you were in my shoes, sued personally by someone like Karen, would you fight back in court or try to settle quietly just to avoid the stress? What would you do? If you believe standing up to bullies is always worth it no matter the cost, drop a stand strong in the comments. And hit that subscribe button, because next chapter, Karen's house of cards finally starts to collapse. The morning after the audit results became public felt like stepping into a different neighborhood altogether. For months, maybe years, there had been this heavy fog over our streets, a kind of unspoken dread whenever Karen's name came up. But now, it was like the sun had finally broken through. I could hear neighbors laughing on their porches, kids playing without the hush-hush warnings of "don't get too loud, the HOA might fine us." Still, there was something lingering. A question everyone whispered when the audit exposed Karen's little empire of fines and backroom deals. What happens now? I'll admit I didn't know the answer myself. Yes, the audit had proven everything we suspected. Funneled money, bogus consulting fees she paid herself, fake pet complaint, citations. The HOA drama had reached the boiling point, but in my gut I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her rarely go quietly, and sure enough, she proved me right within the week. Karen called a special community meeting, insisting she had important announcements about HOA leadership. Neighbors groaned when the flyers hit their mailboxes, but curiosity got the better of all of us. On the night of the meeting, the community center was packed wall to wall. Seniors leaned on canes, young parents juggled strollers, and even folks who never usually showed up were there. You could feel the tension. Karen walked in with her usual theatrical entrance, head high, wearing a sharp red blazer like she was running for President of the United States. She carried a thick folder of papers and slammed it on the table with a grin that made my stomach turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with false authority, "there has been a gross misunderstanding about our finances. These so-called audit findings are nothing but a smear campaign against me, orchestrated by jealous individuals who don't want strong leadership." Gasps and mutters filled the room. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, watching her squirm. Here it comes, I thought. The big lie to cover the truth. Karen continued, pulling out papers from her folder. "I have here affidavits and reports proving that the audit was tampered with. I'll be filing a lawsuit for defamation against certain residents who spread these lies." She didn't say my name outright, but the way her eyes locked on me, oh, she might as well have. Neighbors began murmuring louder now. An older gentleman in the front row stood up. "Karen, the audit came from an independent firm. We saw the documents with our own eyes. Are you saying they're fake?" Karen's smile wavered. "I'm saying mistakes were made, but I have always acted in the best interest of this community." Another voice shouted from the back, "What about the missing maintenance funds? What about the $40,000 consulting fee with your name on it?" The room erupted. People shouted over each other, demanding answers. Karen slammed her fist on the table, face flushed red. "Enough!" she screeched. "You people don't understand what it takes to run a neighborhood. Without me, this place will fall apart. You need me." I stood up slowly, letting the silence fall. My heart thudded, but I forced my voice to stay steady. Karen, we needed honesty, we needed fairness, but what we got was harassment, lies, and fines designed to scare people into obedience. You didn't run this community. You tried to own it. Neighbors clapped, a ripple of approval spreading across the room. Karen's face twisted in fury. She pointed at me. You've poisoned them against me. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're nothing but a troublemaker. Now, I could have fired back with insults. Lord knows I wanted to, but instead I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Behind me, on the community center's projector, a PDF popped up. The full audit report. This isn't my word against yours, I said calmly. This is evidence. Anyone who wants to read it can. And while you're at it, here are the state laws on HOA fiduciary duties. You broke them, Karen. The crowd leaned in as page after page scrolled by. Highlighted transactions, duplicate fines, her consulting fees. Gasps echoed. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for support, but nobody stepped up to defend her, and then the twist hit. One of her own board members, a guy named Paul, who'd always nodded along with her, stood up. His voice cracked with nerves. Karen, I can't do this anymore. You told us the funds were for neighborhood projects, but I checked the accounts. The money's gone. You lied to all of us. The betrayal was visible on Karen's face. She sputtered, pointing at him like he'd stabbed her in the back. Paul, you coward! But the damage was done. Her strongest ally had just turned. The room thundered with voices calling for her resignation. Step down! You're finished! We want a vote now. Karen tried to scream over them, but her voice was drowned out. For the first time in years, the community wasn't scared of her anymore. They were done. The vote happened right there on the spot. Unanimous. Karen was removed as HOA president and, just like that, the Karen meltdown we'd all waited for finally happened. She stormed out of the room, shoving papers into her bag, shrieking, "You'll regret this! All of you!" As the door slammed behind her. Silence hung in the air for a moment, then laughter. Nervous at first, then real, relieved laughter. Neighbors hugged each other, clapped shoulders, and for once it felt like our neighborhood again. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to walk away quietly. She'd be back, maybe with lawyers, maybe with more dirty tricks. And that meant we had to be ready. Still, as I walked home that night, hearing the sound of children playing under the streetlights again, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. And just before I went inside, a neighbor called out, "Hey, Tom, thanks for standing up to her. You gave us our home back?" I smiled. "No," I said, "we gave it back to each other." But, in the back of my mind, one thought whispered, what will Karen do next? Pause if you're raging right now. Can you believe she tried to sue her own neighbors after being caught red-handed? Let me ask you, if you were in that meeting, would you have voted her out on the spot or tried to give her another chance? Was justice served, or should we have gone further? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And hey, if this story made your blood boil, hit that like button to show you stand against HOA bullies. Don't forget to subscribe because the next chapter, let's just say Karen's revenge attempt, makes this meltdown look tame. For a brief moment, life felt normal again. The air was lighter, people waved more often, and the neighborhood finally had its first community barbecue without Karen barging in to count unauthorized guests. But peace in a place like ours never lasts long when someone like Karen is lurking in the shadows. It started with the envelopes, thick, cream-colored envelopes stamped with bold red letters, legal notice. They showed up in mailboxes across the neighborhood like poison seeds. Inside was a letter drafted by Karen's attorney claiming she'd been illegally removed as HOA president. She was suing not just the HOA board, but several residents personally, including me, for defamation, harassment, and intentional emotional distress. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, reading the notice over and over. My stomach turning. She was going for the jugular. It wasn't just about getting her power back. She wanted to bankrupt us, bleed us dry with legal fees, and prove that no one could cross her and survive. Neighbors panicked. Some called me late at night, voices trembling. "Tom, what if she wins? What if we lose our homes?" I'll admit, I felt the fear too. Lawsuits aren't a game, and Karen had money stashed away, but something inside me snapped. I thought about the veterans who taught me to stand tall under pressure, about the neighbors who'd finally found their voices after years of being silenced. And I decided, no more running. We hired our own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca, who didn't flinch when I handed her Karen's threats. She skimmed the papers, smirked and said, "Oh, this is going to be fun. She's just..." handed us the rope to hang her case with. And then came the court date. The courtroom was packed with residents who showed up to support us. Karen strutted in, head held high, dressed like she was attending a gala instead of a hearing. Her lawyer droned on about unfair targeting and community defamation campaigns, waving his arms dramatically. But when it was Rebecca's turn, she didn't waste a second. She pulled out the audit report, laid it on the judge's desk and walked through every misused dollar, every bogus fine, every lie. And then, the cherry on top, she presented sworn affidavits from multiple board members, yes, even Paul, admitting that Karen had misled them. The judge leaned back, expression stern. "Mrs. White," he said, addressing Karen, "what I see here is not harassment against you. What I see is a pattern of harassment by you against this community." Karen's face drained of color. Rebecca wasn't done. She handed the judge a final piece of evidence, bank statements showing Karen had funneled HOA money into a private account under her own name. That was it. The gavel came down, sharp and final. The judge dismissed Karen's lawsuit as frivolous and ordered her to pay the HOA's legal fees. The courtroom erupted in gasps, then cheers. Neighbors hugged, some even cried. For the first time, the law wasn't a weapon in Karen's hands. It was a shield for the people she'd tried to crush. Karen, though, she exploded. She shouted at the judge, at us, at anyone who would listen. Bailiffs had to escort her out as she screamed, "This isn't over. You'll all regret this." But we knew it was over. Back in the neighborhood, we held another vote, this time to dissolve the HOA entirely. The community decided that we didn't need an overlord to live in peace. We replaced it with a voluntary neighborhood committee focused on things like block parties and safety patrols, not fines and threats. The change was night and day. Driveways filled with kids' bikes again. Garden flags fluttered proudly. People painted their doors whatever color they wanted. Bright blues, sunny yellows, even one bold purple. And me, I finally planted the American flag in my yard, just like I'd always wanted. No fines, no threats, just pride. Weeks later, I heard Karen had put her house up for sale. Word was no one wanted to buy it, not with her reputation stamped all over the place. Eventually, she left town, tail between her legs, muttering about ungrateful neighbors. The day the moving truck pulled out, the whole street gathered outside. We didn't cheer, we didn't taunt, we just stood there, silent, watching her go. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about closure. And as the truck disappeared down the road, one neighbor said quietly, "We finally got our neighborhood back." I looked around at the smiles, the laughter, the peace, and realized he was right. Justice wasn't loud or flashy. Sometimes justice was simply freedom. Pause here, because I want to ask you something. If you'd been in our shoes, would you have voted to dissolve the HOA or just replace Karen with new leadership? Do you think neighborhoods are better off without HOAs altogether? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you stuck with me through this entire story, thank you. You just lived through years of HOA tyranny in under an hour. Hit that like button if you think bullies like Karen always get what's coming. And don't forget to subscribe, because I've got more stories of neighbors, justice, and sweet revenge that you won't want to miss.